get this going.
Hey, everyone.
I didn't know. I thought we had more time.
You said you were ready.
Hello. Welcome to Thursday. It's family meeting. What's up?
Laura said she thought it was Wednesday.
No, it's Thursday.
It's Thursday.
It's been Thursday all day.
Woohoo!
Yes.
Now, what happens if somebody has an emoji? Oh, not Kevin's emoji won't show up. It won't do it. Okay.
Oh, it won't do it?
All right, now we know. All right.
Yes, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, let us know you're watching.
Hey, Tiana. Yes, let us know. Not just that you're watching, how you doing?
I got new lights.
Yes.
I spent all afternoon getting new lights here, back here.
Hey, Lincoln. Brandon, hey.
Aye.
Yes.
All right.
And Caroline. I want to say it's Caroline. But if it's Carolina and I missed it, I'm really sorry.
Oh, this is Carlene.
Holla. Yes. Okay, how you doing? It's hot. It's hot for real.
We still don't have air conditioning.
No, we do not have air. We close. Yes.
I almost have passed out a couple times. A couple days we've had to go home because
yes.
it's so hot.
It is so hot.
We're all in one room and we just close the door.
Yeah.
It gets hot.
Windows don't open.
No, they don't open.
We love our office. Don't get us wrong. It's just that they're struggling with fixing the air conditioner.
Yeah.
Yes, but man, it's
rough.
hot. It is real hot. Yes, and I got all this hair on my head. I kind of just want to pull it up, but then
no, you just got that.
I just said pull it up.
Oh,
I just want to pull it up.
Not pull it out.
No, not pull it out. Okay. No,
we gotta get.
What you mean? Closer. I just got that.
You just got the hair
done. You see, you wrong.
I'm sorry.
You guys, that reminds me. I was on an interview yesterday.
Are we not supposed to talk about the fact that's not your real hair? Is that what you're saying?
I'm about to push you in a minute.
I'm sorry. I don't know what we're talking about.
About to sit outside. So I was doing an interview, and a lot of the guy's viewers they listen to it through a podcast and they don't watch it. And whenever I know that someone isn't watching the podcast, or if they have more viewers on the just audio podcast, then I'll tell people I'm Black. People understand I'm not just speaking on something, or speaking on some things, when it relates to Black issues or things like that. So I'll just tell him I don't care. So this guy was he began to describe what the setting was and all that. He was like, I'm really excited that you just, came out and said that you were Black. And I was like, well, I can't deny it. And so he was describing everything, and he was describing my hair. He was like, she has a big smile. She wears glasses. She has medium length hair. It's really curly, and it's a little bit red. He went in to describe my hair, and I was like, do I tell him the truth? Do I interrupt him
to tell him that's not your real hair?
You know what? You's being rude.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be.
I know, I'm just playing. So I mean, because he was going in, he was like, yeah, she just has such pretty hair and and I was like, well, it's braids and it's really braided. It's not, just the way that my hair grows. But I was just like, yes, Krista breaking all kind of rules. Yes, she is. We need to know the hair rules. You don't be talking about people's hair in public. I want to wear my hair up, but if I put it up too high, you might see a track. I can't have that. See, we need to watch Good Hair.
Okay, so we watched Good Hair over the weekend.
Okay, so let me explain. Krista poking the tiger. Let me explain what Good Hair is. Good Hair is a documentary that was created back in 2008 or 9, if I'm not mistaken, and it's somewhere between 2007 and 2009 for sure, by a guy named Chris Rock. Everybody should know Chris Rock from the recent what was it, the Emmys or the Oscars or something. He got hit by Will Smith. So he did a very good documentary on Black hair.
It's super interesting.
It is, and it talks about just how much money goes into Black hair care. What lengths people are willing to go to make sure that their crown is looking good, and why the majority of Black hair care or the black hair industry is monopolized by the Korean community. And so it was very, very interesting. I have seen it a couple of times, but Chris had never seen it. And so
it was interesting. Now, Love the Beach says Black women should get used to wearing our natural hair.
Yes, and I definitely
you pretty much are almost always natural.
Yes. So if for anybody who knows the terminology, I did a big chops years ago and I cut my hair all off. And then I've worn it natural for close to 10 years now, either natural in some kind of protective style. I love my natural hair, but it is definitely a lot of upkeep. And
with all our travel,
with all our travel and all that
in the crochet braids, I think of all the ways that you've done it since you've lived with us. I love the crochet braids.
I do too. I think that it's a lot easier on my hair than even individual braids, but there can just be a lot of stuff. You know, if you talking about our natural hair, then girl, you know what it can take. And
what are the odds that he does a documentary on that and then gets slapped for a hair joke?
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we have another comment. Tiana says, I'm on team healthy hair, creamy crack or not. They talk about that in the documentary.
Yeah. She didn't know what the creamy crack was. Creamy crack is perm. So if you are not aware, there's a perm for blacks and a perm for whites. Or I don't know if that's necessarily a fair critique, but that's how I always grew up thinking about it
all the time.
Yes, and your perms made your hair very curly.
Very curly.
My perms will burn your skin off and makes my hair bone straight. But yes, I am definitely team healthy hair, whether it's creamy crack or not. But I do love my natural hair. It's just a process, and y'all, my hair talk back. It's y'all, it can be rude. So
we could tell some stories about your hair, but we won't.
No.
Okay.
Yes, Tiana says we have relaxers. Yes.
Yeah, that was in the documentary too. I learned all about the relaxer.
Yes.
Okay, are we gonna do this?
Let's get into it.
All right, so go check out Good Hair. That was interesting. There are a couple of bad words in it, but it's not too bad.
No, and there's a couple, skimpy clothes.
But it's educational.
It is. It's super educational and helps people to understand like what goes into our hair. But I think more than anything, it makes us ask the question of, can we be comfortable in our own hair?
Yeah.
And if
see, now people will talk about Jerry curls. That's in
my BFF. You talk about the Jerry curl. Oh,
Al Sharpton.
Al Sharpton does not have a Jerry curl.
What has he got? Relaxer?
What's his name? What is his name? Not Gerald Levert. What is his name? Hold on, because
James Brown.
Luther Vandross.
Oh,
Luther always had that one little curl. But
Al Sharpton
has a relaxer.
He has a perm, Kevin says.
Yeah.
All right.
Michael Jackson. Yeah, so a Jerry curl just makes your hair very curly. Not like a perm for white people curly, though. It's different.
Okay. All right, let's get into what we're talking about today.
Am I allowed to joke about Soul Glow? Just let your soul glow. Do you know what that's from? I'll give you $100 right now if you tell me what that's from.
I have no idea.
What's that from?
I have no idea.
Who can tell me what that's from? Curly and greasy, Kevin. Who knows? Just let your soul glow. Wendy, you can't answer. I want to know what
Al Sharpton had a bad relaxer.
He still got a bad relaxer. Just let your soul glow.
Coming to America?
Coming to America. Yep.
All right. Love the Beach. Knows what that is.
And they sat on the couch. The whole family had a Jerry curl. They sat on the couch. Now, a Jerry curl is really greasy and kind of wet. And so when they got up, everybody had left a stain on these people's couch.
Am I allowed to laugh at that?
It was funny.
Okay.
We have to watch Coming to America. I can't believe you haven't seen Coming to America.
I don't even really know what that is.
Follow the Drip.
Is that a black film? She hasn't seen Anne of Green Gables, so it's all fair.
No, I have not seen Anne of Green Gables at all.
This is the cultural divide.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, are we starting?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's go.
All right.
So today we're going to start out by talking about systemic racism. I noticed yesterday that Ghislaine, I think that's how you say her name.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. But Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years for human trafficking.
And she was the one that would recruit these young gals, teenage gals, for
what's his Jerry Epstein, John Epstein,
Jeffrey Epstein,
yeah,
and his Lolita Express plane, where allegedly famous people flew around the world with underage girls.
Yes.
So she was the recruiter.
So there's that. She was sentenced to 20 years. But then you have R. Kelly, who is did you know who R. Kelly was?
I have no idea who he is.
Okay.
I know he's a black man.
Yeah, he's a black man. She's white. She doesn't necessarily sound like she has like a Susan name, but I didn't know if she was like
what's a Susan name? What is that?
That sounds mean, huh? Like I didn't know if she was American or if she was like of like Eastern European descent or something like that. Susan. My name's not Susan.
Is that like a white stereotype for a white name for a white woman, calling her Susan?
No, Karen is what they call her. But I mean, I don't know. I was just thinking like her name isn't. I don't. You know what? Sorry,
educational show.
It is what came out. I'm sorry.
All right.
So my first thought, seeing that they both were being sentenced for human trafficking, I wondered, why did R. Kelly get so many more years? Like 10 more years. Yeah. That's a lot of time.
She got 20, he got 30.
Yes, he got 30. And so my first little social justice mind, and I'm telling you, there are still some things that linger, was he got 30 years because he's a black man. And, that's just how the system works. The system, is to a degree, and I'm kind of showing my cards here. There's a piece of the judicial system that, and this is part of, I think, what I struggle with in like understanding the judicial system and not wanting to just call out things and being like, well, that's just racism, because I don't have any evidence that it is racism.
But like, if you just look at the surface brute data,
yes,
that's where I would think that some people would go immediately. That just seems like a gross inequity, an example of systemic racism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I wonder why. I even posted something in one of the groups that I'm in, and I'm like, can y'all help me understand? Because this makes absolutely no sense. And people posted like different things that R. Kelly was being brought up on charges for and all of that. And so it led us into a conversation, and I didn't follow the Maxwell trial, and I also didn't follow the Kelly trial. But I think this is what happens very often. People don't follow all of the conversation. They're not in the courtroom. They're not watching it on like court TV or whatever. But then you see these different sentences that are handed out, and it's automatically a systemic injustice. It's automatically because the judicial system is systemically racist, bent against people of color. And so you sent me an article on systemic racism. It just happened. I think you sent it even before I realized the sentencing terms. But I thought it was really helpful. You thought it was really helpful. So we're going to discuss
I want to talk about this article, and then we'll tie it back into this particular conversation about sentencing. And by the way, if you're an attorney or you know an attorney who knows about sentencing practices, please reach out to us, because this is an issue that we would really like to understand better.
Mm-hmm.
But we need someone with expertise. Like, we've talked to a few lawyers who've worked in the judicial system, but they don't know anything really about sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know an expert or you are an expert, consider reaching out to us.
Yeah,
because we would really like to
definitely
have those conversations.
I want to highlight Bob's comment really quick.
Okay.
Because, and this was something that you said too, Maxwell is 60 years old, FYI. And Bob, I'm not sure if maybe you can type it in the chat if you're leaning toward, she didn't get that long of a sentence because she's older. And this could be just a reflection of my cold heart at this point. I am willing to consider that. I don't care. Like if a judge would say you did this crime, but because of your age, you don't get that much time. I don't know that I think that that's a good reason not to sentence someone. I could be wrong. I'm willing to have the conversation. And like I said, it could just be a cold-hearted position. But I think if you did the crime and you know that the crime potentially comes with a lot of time, that is the risk that you are taking. And if you are 60 or 70, whatever, I'm not going to participate in partiality with you.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the biblical standard is that we have certain crimes and certain ways in which we handle those crimes or participate with those crimes, especially biblically. I feel like from a biblical standard.
Someone's making a comment here. AJ says some judges will take age into consideration. Gwenda has a different theory. She says, is it racism or sexism? I haven't followed any of it. So did she get less because she's a woman? He got more because he's a man. I don't know. But these are the things that we would really like to understand better. Is how does sentencing work? How does it vary from state to state? What considerations they're taken into account. Now, I will say a similar trial that I have been following is also involving sex and underage children is the Josh Duggar trial.
Oh.
And he was convicted in a federal trial, and is now in a federal prison for downloading and uploading child porn. And he got 20 years. So he could have gotten like up to 30, but there was one of the charges that they decided not to factor into his sentencing for some complicated reason. So to me, like, sentencing is just this big issue that I just don't understand. But I think the word of caution that we have is don't automatically assume it's racist.
Yeah. So you don't want to automatically assume, but I do think that it's fair to ask the question of what happened here.
Yeah.
Like if you have, I didn't even know anything about the Duggar people, but now you have two people who are, not Black, and they get a lesser sentence. I wonder, and it could be that there was other evidence that R. Kelly's situation was a lot more severe. But when I look at Maxwell's situation, and what that involved in the system that she created to be able to traffic these minors, like that is very, very gross.
And then someone's asking, Kat's putting for the speculation, it could be that, bribe judges, higher ups, other corruption that also factored into it. You don't ever know. All right, I want to get on to the real topic here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because we're 20 minutes into this already. All right, so I want to share this article that was over at the Free Black Thought website. It's called In Search of Systemic Racism, Distinguishing and Evaluating seven different senses of the term. So you can go look this up. It's at the Journal of Free Black Thought. We both follow them on Twitter. They have some interesting things. It's a secular organization, but they platform alternative voices. So this article is by someone named David L. Bernstein. This is an incredibly helpful article. Both of us thought this. So I want to go through his kind of 7 ways of thinking about systemic racism. And in fact, I'm not going to share my screen. I'm going to share, I made some graphics just so that people could follow along with our discussion. So we're going to go through each of these and talk about these 7 different ways that systemic racism shows up, so that when you're in a conversation and somebody starts talking about systemic racism, you can have some mental hooks or mental buckets, to organize your thoughts and begin to ask strategic questions.
What form of systemic racism are you talking about? Why do you believe that this is systemic, instead of just taking the term systemic racism at face value and assuming that it must be a system perpetuating racism.
Yeah.
I think that systemic racism as a term gets thrown out everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's really a problem because
or that everything everywhere
Yeah.
is systemic racism. Your knitting group, your table game hobby
that's
group.
That's Kindy's
So,
view.
all right, so let's walk through these. All right, the first one he calls the whiteness paradigm. And this is when he describes systemic racism is often used to describe the dominant culture in America, one that supposedly favors white cultural practices. So this is, I think what he means by this is when you walk into a room and most of the people are white. And so there's going to be unspoken social norms as to how people interact with each other, cultural values, cultural practices, something you and I are talking about, fairly frequently, is that there are differences, between quote unquote white culture and black culture.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that all black people have the same culture. We're recognizing that Nigerians are not the same as African Americans. We're just using that in a shorthand kind of a way. So maybe we should say African American culture is, different than if you're in a white American type of culture.
Yeah, and the white American type of culture, quote unquote, is also different, region to region.
Yeah.
And, so
okay,
I put the link. I saw someone asked for the link and I put it in YouTube and on Facebook.
Great. So this is where we notice that there's a majority of people that are white. And here's a quote from the article itself that I want to read here
here if you want it
for the podcast.
Okay.
Whiteness and white racialized identity refer to the way that white people, their custom, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared. Whiteness is also the core understanding of race in America. Whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history has created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior and normal. And this is a quote from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. What I think is interesting is his comment about it.
Yes.
And the problem with the whiteness paradigm, I love this part, is that it says it treats the very idea of dominant culture as oppressive.
Yes.
So I think,
and it just assumes that
yes,
there's no proof. It's just that because it's dominant, it must be oppressive.
So we would agree that, there are accepted cultural practices in a dominant culture, but we would even extend that past just white culture. Like no matter where you are in the world, there's going to be a dominant culture where things are just accepted and normal. And there's going to be the minority culture that is different.
Yes. And we can see microcosms of that even here, just in America, in different spaces. And so it's like, when we look at the larger structure of America, as a minority, there are things that are dominant within society that may not be necessarily specifically a part of my culture, my being Black, but because I'm American, there's a lot of overlap, whether we're white or Black.
Yeah.
A microcosm of this, though, is to go into a Black church, and we've done this before.
Yeah.
The idea that anywhere you have a dominant culture, and this is a question that I would ask in having some of these conversations, and I have asked this in regards to systemic racism. And I remember when I asked this in Philadelphia. That was a mess. People complain about the dominant culture as being oppressive, but what happens when the tables are flipped and you bring a white person to a Black church? Is that space oppressive because there is a dominant group and a minority?
Or is it just a custom?
That's what it is. And they will quickly say, well, that's just our heritage, our tradition, our custom. But when it's a predominantly white space and I come in as a minority, it's traumatic, triggering, hostile, like all of these things. Well, what makes one hostile and violent and the other just a tradition?
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to number 2 here. So our summary for that one is we acknowledge, yes, there are dominant cultures, and that can be an example of a system. But the question is when does it become racist?
Yes.
And just because a culture is dominant doesn't automatically follow that it's automatically racist.
Yeah.
It could just be the majority of people have these cultural understandings and shared
an agreement. Yeah.
Agreement, shared beliefs.
But I mean, too, would we say that if someone from another country came to America and you and I participate the same,
yeah,
by and large, is it, am I together with you participating in oppression? Or if I go to another country, mm-hmm. is it oppressive toward me just because they're participating in life the way that they do?
Yeah. I want to highlight one more line here from this article before we move on. That, to be sure, some dominant cultures are more or less inclusive of alternative cultural practices mm-hmm. than others. And we should aim to create more inclusive and fluid dominant cultures. And I think that's a reasonable position, because if we were in the minority, we would want people to include us or have a space to ask questions, or how do I participate? How mm-hmm. can I be part of the group?
Yeah.
So likewise, if we find ourselves in the majority, we should have a mindset of how can I include people in what's happening, just as like the new kid in the school, mm-hmm. So that's just part of being friendly. And I think that is an interesting point. He says, creating more inclusive cultures doesn't require dismantling whiteness, but rather ensuring the dominant culture is tolerant and that all people have access to opportunities provided by the dominant framework. I think you and I would agree with that sentiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think people don't understand that when they say, well, America is the most oppressive country or the most racist country and things like that, because of conversations like dominant groups, you haven't really traveled outside of America and been a minority. America is one of the most, quote unquote, tolerant nations that there is. In my experience, that traveling, there are many countries who won't tolerate an American. There, whether it's a language barrier or color of skin or whatever, there are many other nations where this isn't even like, there's no need for this conversation because there's just no tolerance at all. But yet we focus on these issues as if we are just riddled with them.
Okay, so the first way systemic racism shows up is the whiteness paradigm. So let's go on to the second one that this author brings out. I'm going to go to, is there a number 3? There it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, the disparity paradigm. This is Ibram X. Kendi's version of anti-racism. Mm-hmm. And we always try to remember to give a caveat that Kendi's model, there's a debate as to whether or not it falls under the umbrella of critical race theory or whether it's its own thing. It's other. But he prefers the term anti-racism. And in this paradigm, or this type of systemic racism, it would be looking at the disparities. Mm-hmm. Disparities are basically an evidence of racism.
Yes, wherever there's a disparity, there is an injustice based on an ism.
Okay, so that's kind of Kendi's version of it. And so I'm going to share in the article here this very famous quote by Kendi is, "Where I see racial disparities, I see racism. In
Mhm.
Kendi's view, racial inequality is one or two or more racial groups not standing on approximately equal footing. And this is really what has become the version of systemic racism that is becoming the core organizational principle for our education system.
Yes, and not just our education system, but for boardrooms, for Fortune
Mm.
500 leadership, teams and executive
We need to
committees,
have
executive
equal
teams.
representation.
Yes, and so you're going to have one a little bit of everybody represented, or you're going to be seen as racist.
Okay, so let's see. I'm just looking. If there's anything else we want to quote from this article? All right, let's jump to this part of it. Because you could make the case, and I think rightly so, that some disparities could be an evidence of systemic racism.
Yeah.
This is not to suggest that disparities cannot reflect systemic racism. They may, or that we should not try to reduce consequential disparities from among groups. We should. Only that those disparities in and of themselves are a poor proxy for systemic racism. So in other words, this is a fancier academic way of saying what you and I say is you have to look.
Yeah.
You have to inquire. You have to ask questions.
Every disparity is not an injustice.
But some
But it might be.
disparities could be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if it's there, we should be looking to see if it is there.
Yeah. So, okay, our friend Meg here, who lives in Okinawa, which is, I think it's its own country, so I don't want to say it's part of Japan, but it's near Japan.
Is it? I don't know.
I've lived in Japan for 38 years as a white woman married to a Japanese man, and because of the Lord, I will not even tell you some of what I've experienced. But yes, racism is in all cultures.
Yeah.
It's a sin. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, you ready to go on to the next one?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
Okay. So again, we're reading from this article. I'll show it again here, just for those who are jumping on a little bit late. We're looking at this article called In Search of Racism that was published in the Journal of Free Black Thought, which is a wonderful account to follow on Twitter if you're into the Twitter world, distinguishing and evaluating 7 different senses of the term. We've covered the first 2 usages of systemic racism,
which were the disparity paradigm. That was the one we just did.
Whiteness.
Yeah, whiteness paradigm.
Okay, so the third one is called the legacy paradigm. And this is the description of the lingering effects of, I love this aspect of the definition, historical systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very helpful way
yes.
of thinking about it, such as redlining on Black communities that still live in impoverished and formerly redlined areas. So when we think about systemic racism, a very real example of that, historically speaking, would fall under this umbrella.
Jim Crow laws, redlining, yeah.
Yeah. So you and I would say that historically speaking, the legacy paradigm is real. Mm-hmm. And that there are historical examples that we could point to. I mean, even when you were in South Africa, looking at something like apartheid,
yes,
would be another example of this kind of legacy paradigm.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to highlight there?
I think, sorry, I was trying to read and really, there was something I underlined that I wanted to say. He says there is explanatory power in the legacy of racism paradigm. If a community had been living under oppression for decades and the oppression suddenly subsided, one would expect that the members of the community would have trouble immediately accessing resources, education, political power, etc. When property values are kept artificially high in nearby areas, most often politically progressive than in politically conservative areas, it can make it even harder for people to break out of a neighborhood with serious gang, crime, and drug problems. But then he goes on to say, but the explanatory power wanes over time. Nearly 2/3 of Black people now live in middle-class conditions and above. They are no longer under the shadow of redlining. Many Blacks and whites and immigrants as well have moved from their formerly redline districts. Indeed, the majority of people who lived in redline districts, about 85%, were white. And today, only 28% of the residents of formerly redline districts are Black. So I think that kind of dispels some of the conversation around redlining and the impacts of redlining today, which I appreciated the fact that he brought some facts about redlining and about the legacy of racism paradigm. Yes, can systemic injustices live on over time? Yes, but we can't just throw that out and say, well, that's because of redlining, or that's because of Jim Crow, or that's because of slavery. You actually have to do some digging and see, is that true? And I think that's what he does well here. And you can't just say, well, only this group has been affected by this, because white people were affected by redlining as well. Redlining was, a way to keep Black people from moving too far out and being in spaces or places where they weren't necessarily wanted, but it also was a issue of class and wealth. And so if you didn't have enough money, if you weren't of the right class status or whatever, you also got grouped into the red line district. So it wasn't just only to target Black people.
Very good. Okay, let's go on to are you ready for the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Let's go on to the next one. So this one is number 5 is number 4. Okay, I have the wrong one up there. Let me try again.
Institutional paradigm.
All right, let me try again. This one.
There you go.
The institutional paradigm. This is when we're looking at things that imputes a culture of racism to institutions. So this is one that you and I, when we talk about systemic racism, that we think is very important for people to give a close look at. Because, when people say, do you believe systemic racism is real? Our answer to that question is, it depends. It depends on your definition. It depends on what we're talking about. It depends on the example. It depends on a lot of variables, the situation. Institutional issues, I think any institution can be susceptible to. Mm-hmm. And even one person
can create a system. Yeah. But if one person creates a system, does that make the entire institution racist? Does that mean that the entire structure is racist, or that they have a bad apple and need to correct that, get back on track, and now things will be, more equal or better, quote unquote?
So let's look at some quotes here on this section. The institutional paradigm. So I think that this can be he says this can be a useful application of the systemic racism concept. I think you and I would agree with that. And this is, in our work, the thing that we usually work on the most with other ministries and stuff.
I think it can be helpful because you can look at, like, he gives the example of a precinct and say,
the police officer who murdered George Floyd served in a particular notorious precinct in Minneapolis. Many of the ongoing complaints of harassment and abuse were lodged against officers of the 3rd precinct. It's quite possible and even likely that the 3rd precinct maintained a culture that encouraged abuse and harassment. This is actually something we talked with our friend Mark Perez about when he was on our show. We talked about police reform. That's why I know it's hard, but this is why reporting bad interactions with police officers is important, so that there's a record. And here we go back to the record. It could be that this precinct was kind of corrupt. That would be an example of institutional problems.
Yes, but see, even that needs to be threaded through,
Yeah.
because just because this precinct serves as an institution within the broader subject of policing, does that
In a Black
mean,
community,
yes, but does that mean that the entire institution of policing
all
is
policing
now racist?
across all jurisdictions,
Yes.
everywhere, in all time, and all
Yes.
places.
And so we have to be careful when
Yeah.
people say, well, policing or the judicial system, and this is something that I have to be careful with myself, is, you know, the entire judicial system, or, you know, the entire police system is corrupt, is you know, has run amok with racist systems. Well, you might have a precinct, yes, and would that create a system? Sure, but it is not the bigger institution.
We can't go from potentially one bad precinct in a particular area of Minneapolis to all policing everywhere is a systemically racist
Yes.
institution. You and I have been to
that
where
police station.
to that police area, to the George Floyd area where it all happened. We saw the area where the building burned down, where the police precinct burned down. And so, you know, the question of corruption is an important thing, and corruption can happen to an institution.
Yeah.
And so that is an example of systemic racism that, you know, we're very cautious when people say, you know, that the answer to is systemic racism real, that's a simple yes or no answer. You know, there's a lot of things you have to look at. Yes, cup foods.
Yes,
that's right, Kimba. We went to saw the cup foods, not to be confused with Cub foods, which is a chain.
You know, I underlined here where I don't know if you want to go to it. You don't have to. I can just read it. It says, like other claims, you want me to wait for you?
I can put it up there.
Okay.
That way people can follow along.
Yeah, like other claims of systemic racism, claims of systemic racism in particular institutions should be interrogated. Completely agree. Undoubtedly, institutional racism exists in some institutions, yes, and can explain disparate outcomes in hiring, mobility, and treatment of minorities in those institutions. Here is where it's really the only thing that I kind of pressed back on in this, or wish that there was a little bit more clarity or nuance. And I'm not really a big fan of nuance, that word, but I wish that he would have said of all people. Like, minorities aren't the only people who are targeted by racism, and especially not in this culture.
So minorities, again, going back to our friend Meg, as a white woman living in a Japanese country, she's a minority in that context. So if we were to look at it more broadly, you know, we wished that there had been a little wording that it's not a black or a white to black issue. We're talking about minorities in general, no matter where you find yourself.
Yes. So it doesn't matter where you are, but even in like an institution, like a university, you can have, if you get a group of people together who happen to be all minority and they pissed off at white people, they could create a system to, you know, buck white people. It can happen anywhere. And so this is, you know, so what I'm trying, like, would it not be institutional racism if it happens in an institution toward white people? No,
that still would have been a helpful clarification.
Yes, it's still institutional racism.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. Now we're going to have the implicit bias.
There you go.
All right, the implicit bias paradigm. So this is another way that systemic racism is often talked about and discussed. This is a culture of racism persists in the larger society that generates discriminatory outcomes due to stereotypes or attitudes that operate without a person's conscious awareness. Now, many companies now require their employees to go through what's called implicit bias training, and where you're supposed to explore your unconscious bias. And I'm wondering, is this kind of where the conversation about microaggressions comes in?
That's exactly what I was going to say. This is where microaggressions come in. And I kind of feel like it's a conversation of, I know your heart better than you do because you're white, and I'm a minority, so I can tell you exactly what you were thinking and
where your implicit
yeah,
bias
where you're-
actually
yeah,
is.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. Because if you say you have no implicit bias, then you're just racist, and I can tell you that because I know, because I'm a Black minority. Like,
Right.
it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Do people have bends or implicit biases? Sure, but does it always have to be racial? No, it doesn't.
It could be socioeconomic.
It
That
could-
we have biases about poor people.
we have biases about women, we have biases about men, we have biases about children, teens. Like, it's kind of,
I want to read
just
this.
what we have.
I want to read this section of his discussion in the article. He says progressive activists will often argue that class and race operate intersectionally.
Mhm.
That is, the two factors exasperate each other. But this is a cop-out. It may well be that by studying the phenomena and controlling for income, we would find little trace of racism or little evidence of classism. But there's just sort of this assumption
Mhm.
that this is what's happening. This
Yes.
is why the bias is happening, when there could be other variables.
Yes, it could be
So-
that they just don't like you. I mean, and yeah, I'm gonna leave
But
that
there
alone.
is he cites here an important study that you and I have talked about before from the University of Chicago.
This is a more recent one. This is
Oh,
2021.
you're right. This
Yeah.
is another one where they do fictitious job applications, and what they notice is that Black names that sound Black on applications reduce the likelihood of hearing back from an employer by a 2.1 percentage points compared to distinctively white sounding names. This is not, however, slam dunk proof of society-wide bias.
Exactly.
Which is generally how that's extrapolated. But
because all of America is racist.
Right. But I think it is interesting to point out, and you and I have talked about this, like, wouldn't a world be wonderful where when there was a practice where the HR department, when they send the application to a manager to review, there wasn't a name on it. It was just a number.
Mhm.
And so you're only evaluating the person according to their skill set. You're only evaluating them according to their experience or their references, so that would be a way of reducing implicit bias.
Yeah.
I could see that as having some value.
I also appreciate, though, that he mentioned that the 2.1% is such a small percentage that it could be based on like a margin of error, or that it could be those who actually conducted the study who are in error, not necessarily the biases of institutions or hiring practices.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Discriminatory policies paradigm. So this is public policies that negatively impact Blacks, such as discriminatory application of drug laws. I think this takes us back to the conversation we had at the top about the sentencing practices.
Yeah.
Is it unequal sentencing based on race? I think that would sort of fall under this umbrella.
Yes. I think so many thoughts. When people talk about the disparity in sentencing, or the disparity, especially around the drug conversation, one of the things that I tend to highlight, and that he highlighted in this article very well, was that, can we really say that it was, or that it is discriminatory practices when these laws are in place because of the request, or from the request of Black people, Black leaders? We are dealing with laws that have been in place for a long time, that were stiff on people who use like crack, or things like that, because of how it was impacting Black communities.
Some of the harsh,
is it really racist?
Yeah, because some of the harsh sentences that were put in place in the late 80s, early 90s were actually put in place by Black prosecutors. But now that's seen as
racist because of the disparity.
Discriminatory, yeah.
Because it's created such a huge disparity.
So, all right, I'm just trying to look here if there's anything else we want to highlight in this section. This is kind of interesting. The intent, unless the intent of the policy is racist, disparate outcomes by race should not, I would add the word automatically be attributed to systemic racism. Many public policies do not work as intended, and they end up disproportionately impacting specific groups that were not foreseeable. So again, here's where inquiry matters. And, if a policy isn't working, we need to maybe revisit the policy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't automatically mean that the policy is racist.
I also would wonder, or do wonder, how much of this is, how much of the disparity is also caused by poverty. So how many people, if we were to take race off the table, would those numbers, be closer together based on poverty?
Yeah. So this is, again, where the discriminatory drug policies, or the alleged discriminatory drug policies, sentencing laws, this is all part of this type of systemic racism. Okay, the final one, number 7, is... This is one you've talked to me about before, is the exclusive network paradigm.
Yes.
This is where the dominant class of whites hoards professional opportunities in a closely knit professional or social network. And I remember when you and I first started talking about this, and you were bringing this to my attention, in hiring practices, and how white people just hire other white people. They hire their friends, their family, their social connections, and that you saw that as an example of systemic racism. I had never thought about it, considered it, or that, but this is a type of alleged systemic racism that some people could raise.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my thoughts have, I don't know why I say I think so much. My thoughts have shifted on it a bit over the last few years. I feel like, if you have a business and your business hires people that I don't know that it's my place to come in and say, you must hire outside of the people that I don't know, like I said, if that's my place. But I think that if they are advertising that, they have a job opening, and you're the best candidate, if you're, white or a person of color, whatever your ethnicity is, I think the best candidate should always be hired, and not just lean toward, my friend or whatever. But I also wonder if this cultural moment that we're in, with so many companies, potentially being sued because they are quote unquote racist, because they don't participate in DEI and things like that, if that would make people want to only hire their friends.
Yeah. I think hiring is so tricky. And now that we're in a position of hiring, like you and I are trying to hire someone that has a biblical worldview. That's like 4% of the population right now. I mean, already we have a bias about who we're interviewing, what kinds of questions we're going to ask, so does that mean automatically, that racism is involved, or classism, or sexism? Well, in our case, people would say that we have a bias, a religious bias, but not all biases necessarily are sins.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to really be careful and inquire.
Yeah. I also wonder if people realize that minorities also do this, though. This isn't just something that white people do. I have been a part of groups on Facebook that are all Black, only for Black people, where they just share their hiring information, and they're a part of large companies. I didn't realize it then, but now I can see that some of these people who work, in the same company, are creating systems where they can hire Black people, and they are very open about it. There's no hiding it at all.
Yeah, and so I think that while we all have biases, I would say that even people who are trying to push more systemic racism than you and I would feel comfortable with. They also have biases.
Yeah.
The people who run implicit bias trainings
have biases. They
biases.
come to the table with these biases. They automatic. Robin DiAngelo is a perfect example of that. She does implicit bias training, but her bias is that all white people are racist. So there's that. Let's get to the William Murphy. Was there anything you wanted to say about that?
No, I don't know if we should really go in that because
no, we should. I know
we're at the hour.
yeah, that's fine. But
Can you turn the fan around because I'm dying?
Yeah,
I'm gonna pass out. Here in a minute.
Don't you do it. The
All
devil is a lie.
We're gonna turn the fan around, and then we're gonna do one more little segment here. All right. So I think the bottom line of all of this, and we hope you found this helpful, that you'll go check out the article on Free Black Thought. I hope what you got out of this is, just some ways to think about systemic racism, some questions to ask, some understanding, like, yeah, some systemic racism could be real.
Yeah.
Other aspects of it could be more historical or can be overcome if we have more objective hiring practices.
And some of it just isn't there. People are
Yeah.
using it as a straw man. But we
Yeah.
have to do research and find out either way. We don't just take someone's word. That's systemic racism.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's in everything.
It's everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
no. Okay, so I don't know
Are
if
we really doing this?
Yeah, we are. I don't know if anyone knows William Murphy, but he's a
I have
gospel
no idea.
artist.
I
Yeah, I
never
know
heard
you
of this
don't.
guy.
I know you don't. I know. Just
She assures me he's some famous person.
he is. So he's a pastor, but he's also a worship leader. He did that song God Chaser. If you know William Murphy, then you know William Murphy, but he's had like a couple good albums out. Now he on Sunday, men, I'm just going to say that he was directing things toward you because, women should have rights. And he was declaring that the men should, be lining up to get the vasectomies.
All right, well, let's play the clip. Don't be
Go
giving
ahead. I'm ready. I'm here for
All
it.
right.
I want to see what y'all think.
All right.
All right, our country is in a crisis. Y'all do know America's going to hell, right? But my conviction is America can't go to hell with me and my family living here. I'm not politically correct. I'm not supposed to say that. And some people will say, well, Bishop, you're a man of God. Are you pro-abortion? I am pro-human and civil rights. It's my conviction that a man, because let's go here, okay? So let's all set appointments to get vasectomies. Or better yet, they not shutting the vasectomy clinics down. I don't hear nobody saying nothing. I didn't see one protester outside of a vasectomy clinic. I didn't see one. But we want to legislate. Listen, we cannot legislate morality. That's why the church is in existence. That's why there's a separation of church and state. That's why the church legislates morality. The government legislates the law of God. All right?
I don't know how the government is legislating the law of God when the government don't know the laws of God.
Or that the government doesn't legislate morality. The government legislates the laws of God. Isn't that morality? That felt like a big circle to me. Okay, first of all, let's talk about vasectomy clinics.
I'm just waiting for the guys to go on and jump in get in the comments. Tell me, see, I didn't know. I guess, well, okay, first of all, one of the important things that I want to highlight, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is watch and see if abortion does not become a civil rights issue.
Because he kind of alluded to that.
Everything is getting tied onto this, 1964, 1965 Civil Rights Act. Everything. So first, it was the very real issue of how we treat a human person based on the color of skin. We do not kill the image bearer simply because they bear a different skin color than I do, or than you do, or whatever. Okay. But from there, we now have the LGBTQ plus community that has hitched themselves to the civil rights movement as well. And this has happened for a very long time. There are books that have been written on why the LGBTQ plus, agenda is not the same as the civil rights agenda, why they cannot be held to the same tier. But you keep watching. All of these social theories are going to be tied onto the civil rights movement. Abortion is going to soon, in my personal opinion, I'm not saying it's a word from the Lord, but I believe that abortion is going to be tied to the civil rights movement, because I should also be allowed to live. Okay, I should be allowed to live without the encumbrance of a child. I should be allowed to live without having someone else impede upon my right to life. We're not talking about the baby's right to life. I have a right to life. This guy, and this is why we do off code, because this demonic form of thinking is prevalent and running rampant within the Black community. I'm not saying that it's not in white communities, Hispanic communities, Asian communities. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that as Black people get the most abortions in America. We have a disproportionate amount of abortions in America. We are murdering our children in huge percentages. And yet the church, this man, I would consider this man, and I used to love his music, like up until today. I really enjoyed his music. But I would say that to a degree, and I don't even know if you can be degreed in being a wolf in sheep's clothing. There is something wrong. There's something wrong that must be addressed and called out. That is demonic. If you are going to say, well, if a woman can't have an abortion, then men should go and have vasectomies, what are you then saying about the commitment that a man and a woman should have before they even decide to engage in sexual relations?
Yeah, we'll watch a little bit more of the clip here, because that was a question I had too, is like, is he going to get around to the conversation about preaching against fornication? Or I'm not sure. It's a little unclear to me, but I do think it's interesting, just by way of analogy, comparing vasectomies to abortions strikes me as a false analogy.
Yes.
In logic. It's a fallacy, because having a vasectomy is a pregnancy prevention measure. Having an abortion
is killing
a human person. That fertilized egg is already implanted and growing. What about that child's civil rights?
Yes.
You want to have a conversation about civil rights? I guess I just have so many questions about how he's arguing. It doesn't seem sound to me, just from a logic perspective. But I also think that there's a few people on here who have made the very fine point that I'm still puzzled by the statement that we can't legislate morality. All laws legislate morality. All laws tell us what we can and cannot do. Mm-hmm. We legislate theft.
Yeah.
We legislate,
not in California.
Really. No, not in California, but in all the sane parts of the country. Mm-hmm. We legislate theft. We legislate murder. We legislate all manner of behaviors. And so this just feels like a complete straw man in saying we don't legislate morality. But then there's the absolute contradiction where he says in the very next sentence, the government legislates the laws of God. Well, that's morality.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Our friend Mike Davis says, in response to legislation not being responsible for changing hearts, I agree. But I liked what Dr. King said. It may be true that a law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great way of saying it. All right, you want to play a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
More of the clip here. All right, let's play a couple more, a little bit more of this.
Right? And so women have rights too. I don't have a right to tell you that. And somebody said, well, some super religious person who got a bunch of sin in their life said, well, abstinence is the answer. Well, you didn't abstain. And what kills me is people out there protesting already had one. So you had one in your younger years. And then don't tell me you're protecting the unborn. Because if you're really pro-life, you wouldn't be cutting back funding for schools. If you're pro-life, you wouldn't be fighting for 18-year-olds to buy machine guns. If you're really pro-life, why are you fighting for somebody who's not in law enforcement, somebody who's not in the military, to have a legal right, a constitutional right, to purchase a clip that holds 100 bullets? But you're pro-life? Because I ain't seen a deer shoot back yet.
But this is what happens is all of these issues start getting collapsed on one another. Like we can't have just a conversation about abortion.
Well, I think first of all, he's calling out people or trying to call out people and saying, but you had one in your younger years.
Yeah.
As if because somebody may have had an abortion in their younger years, it's okay to, that's why we should keep abortion legal today, because I might have had one in my younger years. How about confronting sin and saying what you did was sin and what they are lining up to do is also sin, and that does not change. But it also sounds like he's condemning the person who might change their mind. So for the person who is pro-abortion right now, because I used to be pro-abortion, well, I can't offer correction and biblical counsel to someone who is pro-abortion because I used to be pro-abortion. Is that hypocritical now? No. What if I've just seen a better way?
What if you changed your mind?
What if I changed my mind? What if I understand the scriptures, in a better, more informed way now?
Yeah. Mike Davis says he's comparing apples and Honda Accords. It's like
basically
this is like, and then it's just kind of all over the place. Like we can have the conversation about the Second Amendment. To me, right now we're talking about the civil rights of the unborn. So yeah. I'm just, these are all very challenging conversations to have in public. I guess for me, when I watched this clip, the question that I had was, if this is how he's discipling his people, if I was sitting in the pew, I mean, and
you wouldn't know how to.
I wouldn't know what I was supposed to do. I mean, and correct me in the comments if you think I'm wrong, but he kind of low key sounds like fornication is just normalized.
Fornication is normalized, and in my personal opinion, he low key taking a jab at white people and Kyle Rittenhouse. But
that on the side, it's like when he's just talking about the abortion issue, he says, "Well, you had one. All the protesters had one." Mm-hmm. It's just he never says. I guess I was sitting there waiting for him to say, fornication is not God's way. Adultery is not God's way.
No.
Like that conversation.
That don't keep the money coming in. Sorry.
Oh, and that never happened.
No, it isn't. But I also think that he's bought in, and Kevin mentioned this. I only saw the first sentence before he disappeared, but Kevin mentioned this, like he's bought into leftist agenda. He's it's just completely bought in. And like when you think that in order to protect human life, the government must pay for your child's schooling, make sure that they're taken care of until the age of 18.
That's legislating morality, though.
It is legislating morality. So which one is it? Do we not legislate morality? Do we legislate morality? Is fornication okay? You're standing in a pulpit as a pastor and a worship leader, so I'm hoping that you would say fornication is not okay. I think we need to have better conversations about roles and responsibility.
This is just, it's very sad to me. You know, the level of, I just kept thinking, like, how is he discipling his people, and what would they be getting from this? It's, I don't know, maybe it's just me, and it just seemed very confusing.
Tiana says, I think he is talking about pro-birth versus pro-life. I think that's an interesting take on it. I have used the, yeah, it could be. I have used the term womb to tomb, and I know that's a very sensitive, kind of conversation. And because I believe womb to tomb. So I believe in the life that is in the womb. And I also believe, in having a death and burial and everything that's in between that. How do we treat the person well while they are alive? How do we, but that comes from the law of God. It also comes from the law of God, that, you know what, I can't even go down there because it will be on here another hour. But it's informed by God's moral law. I can't take and pick bits and pieces of it, nor can I say, because I am womb to tomb, that that now the government must take care of my child and now put off the responsibility of life onto someone else, because that is not found in God's moral law. And I feel like that's what he's doing, that if he is arguing a pro-life versus just being pro-birth, position, I would say, well, if we're going to talk about being pro-life, then we have to talk about responsibility. We have to talk about what does it mean to truly be pro-life and to advocate for life and to honor the dignity, value, and worth of an individual. Part of that is work. How do we, influence people to work? How do we influence people to live lives that will help them thrive? But he is not pro-life. Just based on his stand right now, I would argue that he is not pro-life. I would say that
he seemed very hesitant about it, because I watched, there was another service where he gave a similar stand-up. Yeah. This was one service. There's another service, and he gave a similar routine. But in that one, he went into more detail. It really, and again, this could be just a perception. It seemed like he was very hesitant to just come out and say that's an unborn human person.
Well, here's the thing. In the argument of pro-life, people are looking at how does the person live after they're born. That usually falls along some kind of socialist spectrum, in my personal opinion. But you cannot, as a Christian, argue and say that I am pro-life if you are not willing to hold people accountable to sin.
This gets to Tiana's question, and she's asking, who defines what's moral? I think this is an important question, because we would take the position that God's eternal moral law defines what morality is and what sin is. And so it's not arbitrary. It's what Christians have historically believed.
Yes. And so looking at like the 10 Commandments, how do you love God and how do you love your neighbor? Then you can look at the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy and see how that is, unpacked. How do we treat people in, the day-to-day? But I can also, then go into the New Testament and hear Jesus say that, the greatest command is to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how do I find out how to love my neighbor? Well, it's to go back to God, where Jesus himself got that word, which is from Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken, Deuteronomy 6. But I would argue that if William Murphy thinks that he is pro-life, I would push back strongly on that and say that you cannot argue for death of an unborn child and say that you are also for life, because you are advocating for the sin of the person having the abortion, and you are also advocating for the death of the person that's within the womb. And that is not life according to God's standards. Culture will always offer us a definition of what life is. This is why he can jimmy rig, abortion onto the civil rights issue. culture has a definition of life that is not always in line with a biblical standard of life. But as a pastor, he should be ashamed of himself to say that, this is the position for life.
Tiana asked another very thoughtful question. I want to make sure we
Come on, Tiana.
Tackle is, are eggs considered life? And I would say no. Just as sperm are not considered life. When they're fertilized, then we would have life. So to go to your comment here, that would make birth control murder. So it's a very thoughtful issue that you're raising. And we hope to get an OBGYN soon on our podcast to talk about the medical aspects of life and abortion and
birth control,
hormone-based birth control. There's a very important issue that you're raising.
Yes.
So how most birth control works as hormone-based for the woman, it actually creates an environment that's hostile to the egg being implanted. And so, but what can happen in some situations is that the egg and the sperm can be formed, but it does take a few days, some days, for the egg to travel all the way down and to become implanted. So technically, if you believe that life begins at conception, hormone-based birth control is an abortion-inducing, it creates an abortion-inducing environment. So
if the egg is
fertilized.
Yeah. If the egg is fertilized.
So that's just the very short answer, just from a scientific perspective on that issue. And
but an egg not fertilized would not be an abortion.
Just as a sperm not fertilized. Yeah. So, yes, you're asking all the right questions, Tiana, and we will have a whole show about this very soon.
On IVF on the 9th.
Yeah, so you're asking the very next logical question is, if fertilized eggs are life, where does that put IVF embryos that are implanted? Is it abortion? I would argue, because I do hold to a position that life begins at conception. So what we have done in our medical technologies is created scenarios where fertilization can happen outside of the natural environment, and then we store those. And there's a whole conversation about how many fertilized eggs to implant, and then sometimes they're frozen, sometimes those zygotes are then planted. If it didn't work out, maybe the first round didn't work, sometimes they're held in storage, sometimes they're discarded. And I think that is,
but they are fertilized.
And so that is the very real complication that is created by the medical technology of in vitro fertilization. And that has been a technology that has been around for 25 or 30 years. I remember learning about that 30 years ago when I was in seminary. I took a medical ethics class, but it was as the technology was being developed. It was kind of like, here's what we can now do. It was the potential for it. Now we're living in an age where it's just so normalized. I think that often we don't think about what the medical technology is and the impact of that for pro-life. So there is a whole adoption model called snowflake adoption, where often Christian couples, not always, but often Christian couples who believe that life does begin at conception will adopt these fertilized IVF in storage embryos so they don't get thrown away and bring them to term. And so that's a form of adoption.
Good questions, Tiana.
Yeah.
But we're going to tackle the IVF conversation on July 9th.
I don't know.
That's a Saturday. I believe it is.
Is that when we're doing it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, that is correct. That's why a lot of Christians don't take hormonal birth control. And that was a decision I made, 28 years ago. When I first got married, that was just the standard thing of hormonal birth control. And then once I understood how it worked, when I took a medical ethics class, I was like, oh, I didn't realize, because my doctor never explained that to me. And so then in order to live congruently with my worldview as a Christian, I had to make a behavioral change. So.
I think, it's tricky because birth control just gets thrown out there for all kind of things,
Yeah.
you know? So nurse here, if we are thinking holistically, we have to think,
think of birth control in the birth control argument as well as IVF. Yeah, I think it's a similar vein. If IVF is abortion, if all those eggs are fertilized and not implanted, I agree. It's all in the same stream of thought. So, okay, we hope this gives you some things to think about. We're going to be having some conversations in the coming weeks related to various aspects of the pro-life issue. We're going to have different voices on to tackle the question from a lot of different angles, because there's the science behind it, there's the ethics behind it, there's even some biblical arguments for abortion. And so we're going to be tackling these topics
Wait,
over
say
time.
that again. Maybe offer a little bit more perspective, because you said there are biblical arguments for
there are arguments from the Bible that people put forward as saying the Bible is okay with abortion.
Yes, we don't hold that position.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, somebody came on our I shouldn't share this, but somebody came on our Instagram page and said that they wanted to have a conversation with me because I was traumatic. Did I talk about this already?
No.
Yeah, because I was traumatizing people by saying that abortions were, killing babies, and they wanted to have a conversation with me so that they could convince me of why I was wrong and that abortions were actually a biblical position.
But they don't know that you used to be pro-choice.
And I do know all those arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it ended in a very interesting way, but
So anyways, that's it for this week. We hope you have found this conversation helpful. We will be having a show on Saturday. We don't quite know what it is yet.
We ain't got no clue.
We've approached a few people. Nobody was available. We'll see how it all turns out. If all things, we'll have a Ask Me Anything if everything fails. But, we appreciate the engagement. We want to do topics that interest you and will help equip you in your faith and really help you build out your worldview.
Yes. And this is the last day of June. And so for the month of June, we held a mid-year giving campaign. To everyone who has given, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
If you have not yet given and you would like to give to support our mid-year giving campaign, you can do so. You can do so tomorrow too. But as specifically as part of the campaign will end tonight at midnight. Please prayerfully consider how you can support the Center for Biblical Unity.
Yeah. Somebody's saying have Beckett Cook on. We did back in February. He was the kickoff for our season.
Yeah.
So you can check out that conversation. All right, friends. We will see you soon. Good night and God bless.
Bye. Wash hands. Yeah, I agree with that, Patricia. Yes.